Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly, doctor.
Oh, great, great. Good morning, good afternoon, and great to see some of friends, and also nice to meet you, new ones. Um, so my presentation focuses on funding the state in Afghanistan, and as I will look at the past, present, and future of the state funding in Afghanistan. So I would like to start with a few observations. Um, so the first one is that over the 200 or 50 years, Afghanistan experienced fiscal fragility. So what do we mean? So it was not able to finance the state through domestic revenues. And in particular, historically, if we look at um, different periods of the history during the 18th and 19th century, uh, the state was mostly financed through tribute and subsidies. And then coming to 20th century, maybe I should share this slide, which through which we can clearly see. So the state received significant amounts of revenue from external sources through tribute. And then since mid 20th century until present, foreign aid played an important role in financing the state in Afghanistan. In this slide, we can see external revenue as percentage of state income in Afghanistan. So the selected year during the Durrani Empire, 1793, and until 2004 and 21. So the figure between 2004 and 21 under the Republic in Afghanistan is the average percentage of the state budget being funded through foreign aid. But also during 1965 and 1980, the funding included, so that the figure includes also sales of natural gas. So this is the background about the sources of financing in Afghanistan. So what does it mean? The first one is that the argument I make is that state fiscal weakness shaped governance and stability in Afghanistan. At different periods, the termination of external revenue to Afghanistan resulted in regime change or political instability. We have a number of examples of that, so we can give the reference of Najibullah's the government and also the Republic in Afghanistan. The decline of aid impacted stability. Coming to the question of governance, and also it was not only whether the state was adequately funded, but also from which sources the funding was coming, which had implications on accountability, governance, and institution building. So depending on this situation, the reliance on external funding, different types, had implication. For example, we had cycle of short-term priorities. The leaders would focus on short-term priorities, and also regime stability. It was linked with regime stability, the availability or lack of funding, and also especially after 2001. So we saw donor-driven policies in Afghanistan. The governments, the leaders become more accountable to donors than to citizens, especially also in my book, Eight Paradoxes in Afghanistan, I discuss. So the sources of funding contributed to three types of paradoxes in Afghanistan. One was the divergence between state and society fiscal relationship as both the state I mean, the government and citizens or the civil society needed to bargain and negotiate with donors rather than the government and the government with people. And also, especially in the 20th century, we have reformist attempts in Afghanistan, especially during 1919 to 1929, under Amanullah Khan's, rule. But it was undermined by limited surplus, economic surplus in Afghanistan, and also resistance to taxation, because during this period, Afghanistan lost the income from British subsidies. So during the Cold War, because of foreign rivalries, I mean power rivalries between the Soviet Union and the US, it turned Afghanistan into a proxy battlefield. So what happened during this period? Economic aid gave way to military aid. The US and the Soviet Union shifted from financing predominantly development projects to financing, military and security in Afghanistan. So then coming fast forward to the Republican period, so from 2001 and 2021, Afghanistan became one of the highest in aid-dependent countries. So aid finance, the infrastructure, education, health, and also elections. And during this period, dependence on aid deepened. So I don't want to give the figures, so just from the US, around 140 billion was appropriated for reconstruction. So it doesn't include the cost of war in Afghanistan. So in terms of the sources of funding, the national budget on average between 2004 and 21, 50% of it was financed by foreign aid, especially grants. During this period, also domestic revenue grew, but remained insufficient. And security dominated the expenditure, especially because of the insurgency and insecurity we had in Afghanistan. So until 2010, 51% of budget was allocated to security, but it increased in 2019 to 60%. So then after the collapse of Republican Afghanistan and takeover by the Taliban, so we saw termination of development and military aid to Afghanistan and also international sanctions being imposed. And between 2021 to 23, we had 25% of economic contraction in the country. And the budget, coming to the budget, so we don't have much information about the Taliban budget for Afghanistan, but through different sources, we can observe that for 2022, $2.6 billion dollar was allocated to national budget, but we had 20% of deficits. It also shows contraction of the national budget being much smaller than the previous government. So as also Dr. Isar mentioned about taxation of the Taliban, so during this period also, the funding sources shifted to Ushur and Zakat as well. So incorporating those areas that the Taliban was collecting from communities or different sources. So what happened in terms of implication? It worsened the hardship in Afghanistan amid widespread poverty. So in terms of the flow of aid, so it continued, especially through humanitarian aid. Between 21 to 23, about $7 billion was split to Afghanistan. So this was less than half of the needs for the country. So to conclude, so I would like to highlight a few issues. The first question is, if looking at the past and current situation, how would the situation look like in the future for Afghanistan? Before the collapse of the Republic in Afghanistan during the negotiation between the Taliban and the then government, the World Bank predicted three scenarios, and both three scenarios, but none of them predicted the collapse in Afghanistan. For example, the best case scenario was that there would be a settlement between the then government and the Taliban, and there would be stability. And even in that case, Afghanistan would need about 6 billion of grants annually. But the worst scenario was that if the peace process did not work and there was no political settlement and the fighting would worsen in Afghanistan, the government would need 8.2 billion or 8 billion grants annually. But none of them predicted a collapse. So with the collapse, so even now the gap is bigger. And if we give a figure, which is quite difficult task to do so, but Afghanistan would need between 6 to 9 billion annually for the first 5 years of post-Taliban government. And so I don't want to touch base about domestic revenue, about the predictions. It could be between 2 to 3 billion. So also another question that would raise is, can Afghanistan achieve fiscal sustainability? So this also brings the question of natural resource potentials or revenue from natural resources that Afghanistan has. But there are also the risks. So one is the risk of rentier state, deepening of the dynamics of rentier state in Afghanistan, reduced accountability and repression by the regime. And also this utilization natural resource potentials in Afghanistan requires institution capacity, legal frameworks, and stability. So to bringing them together, so a number of issues are important to keep in mind in the case of Afghanistan. So I would like to highlight a few, share key findings from this study. The first one is that from the case of Afghanistan, that funding sources shape governance in the state building in Afghanistan for institution development. The second one is that, especially when talking about sustainable financing of the state in Afghanistan, it is also something very political. So it depends on whether we're having an inclusive and representative political order in place, or we have a repressive regime in place. So the outcome would be different. And the third one is that weak financing of the state risk reinforcing instability and even regime change, as we had in the past in Afghanistan. So what Afghanistan needs in a best case scenario to balance between aid, domestic revenue, and resource development for a viable future state. Without sufficient financing, it's less likely we can have a viable state in Afghanistan. And last but not least, bad dependency is more likely to persist in Afghanistan. So especially the pattern of the state building we had in the last century and even before that. So that may repeat in Afghanistan unless the conditions are changed. Yeah, with that, I stop here and look forward to the conversation, or if there is any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asif. Thanks a lot. That's very interesting.